You're mine now. These were the words the 47-year-old millionaire whispered to the 23-year-old girl who collapsed in the storm. But can you imagine what happened when she discovered the hidden secret that had intertwined their destinies generations before they met? Tell me, where are you watching from? If this story is moving you, subscribe to the channel and hit that like button, because what you're about to discover about their fate will leave you breathless. The March storm had transformed the cobblestone streets of Boston into furious torrents. The sky, tinged with a leaden gray, unleashed its fury on the historic New England city with an intensity that seemed intent on erasing centuries of history. Amidst this chaos of water and wind, a solitary figure struggled to remain standing. Thea Harrington, 23 years old, clung to her worn coat as water mercilessly infiltrated through the frayed seams. Her faltering steps led her to the entrance of an old Beacon Hill mansion, where her legs finally gave way. Collapsing on the century-old stone steps, she contemplated her trembling hands, bluish from cold and weakened by 3 days of forced fasting. Destiny never asks if we're ready for its designs. It simply places us where we need to be, even when we believe all is lost, she would think later, recalling that moment of absolute vulnerability. The rain struck her face, mixing with silent tears when a creak announced that the heavy carved doors were opening. The warm light from inside cast the silhouette of a tall man on the threshold. Gareth Montgomery, 47 years old, observed the fragile figure on his steps with his brown eyes. Those eyes, deep and melancholic, had seen too much of the world to be surprised, but something in the dignity with which this young woman endured her misery touched his soul in a way he hadn't felt in years. "You're mine now," he pronounced with a firm yet gentle voice, extending his hand toward her while assessing her pitifully fragile state. "My responsibility, my ward, and I won't allow you to suffer even one more day." These words, spoken with the distinctive Boston accent that Thea had heard from her grandmother in childhood, resonated in the air like a decree of protection that, without either of them realizing, would alter the course of both their lives forever. Thea raised her gaze, revealing extraordinary green eyes that, despite her exhaustion, shone with an inextinguishable inner light. For an eternal moment, they regarded each other like two souls recognizing something deeply familiar in the other, something that transcended time and circumstances. "I don't need charity," she murmured with a weak but proud voice, while her fingers unconsciously closed around his extended hand. "It's not charity that I'm offering," he responded with a barely perceptible smile. "It's justice." And so, with the roar of the storm as witness, Thea crossed the threshold into a world that would transform her existence, not knowing that, in reality, she was returning to a place her soul already knew. Dawn arrived with an unforgiving clarity to the room where Thea had slept deeply for the first time in weeks. The New England sunlight filtered through lace curtains, projecting intricate patterns on the whitewashed walls. For a moment, upon opening her eyes, the young woman believed she was dreaming. The ceiling, decorated with dark wood panels, contrasted dramatically with the peeling ceilings of the cheap boarding houses where she had spent the last few months. The reality of her situation hit her hard. She was in the mansion of a stranger, taken in out of compassion. Pride, that backbone that had kept her upright during the worst moments, twisted painfully inside her. "The true prison," she reflected as her fingers caressed the Egyptian cotton sheets, "is not the circumstances surrounding us, but the chains we forge with our own expectations." Gareth awaited her in the inner courtyard, where a marble fountain murmured aquatic secrets among apple trees and jasmine. Seated before a mosaic table, he drank coffee with parsimony while reviewing documents with a concentrated expression. "Good morning," he greeted without raising his gaze, as if Thea's presence were a habit of years. "Breakfast is served. You need to regain your strength." The table was laden with freshly baked bread, cold-pressed olive oil, ripe tomatoes, and a selection of local cheeses. Thea's stomach contracted painfully at the sight of such abundance. "Why are you doing this?" she asked directly, remaining standing. "You don't know me." "I don't owe you anything I can repay." Gareth finally raised his eyes. The morning light revealed the lines that time and worries had carved into his face. His eyes, however, had the clarity of someone who had found answers to difficult questions. "Many years ago I made a decision based on pride," he responded with measured voice. "That decision cost me what I loved most. Perhaps helping you is my way of balancing the scales. I'm not your redemption project, she replied with sudden harshness. An unexpected smile illuminated Gareth's face. Precisely why you're perfect for the role, he said, returning to his documents. Eat. Afterward, we'll discuss how you can earn your stay here, since charity offends you so. That afternoon, as Gareth showed her the mansion, Thea discovered that the building, constructed in the early 1800s during Boston's Federal period, was a labyrinth of interwoven stories. Each room harbored treasures, century-old tapestries, ancient manuscripts, and what caught her attention most, an impressive collection of colonial-era portraits and historical paintings that urgently needed restoration. They've been deteriorating for years, Gareth explained with regret. I've sought specialists, but no one seems capable of respecting the original techniques. Thea's fingers instinctively caressed the geometric patterns of a particularly damaged frame. Her eyes immediately detected the pigments used, the application techniques, the secrets held in each stroke. I could restore them, she murmured almost to herself. What did you say? Gareth stopped, surprised. I said I could restore them, she repeated with more firmness. My grandfather was a master restorer in Charleston. He taught me everything he knew before he died. The incredulity on Gareth's face gave way to an indecipherable expression. Without a word, he led her to a small workshop in the back of the mansion, a forgotten room full of dust-covered tools. If what you say is true, he declared, opening the shutters to let in light, you've just found your way to pay for your stay. That night, as the moon illuminated the mansion's gardens, Thea remained awake, contemplating the ceiling. For the first time in a long time, she felt something akin to hope, but also an inexplicable fear, as if destiny had been weaving this moment since long before her birth. During the following weeks, Thea immersed herself in the restoration work, like someone diving into deep waters to escape a fire. Her hands, which had always been skilled, rediscovered the ancestral memory that dwelled within them. Each morning she awoke at dawn, eager to return to the small workshop that Gareth had set up for her. The first painting she restored was a delicate colonial portrait from the early 1800s. As she worked, she sang old Southern ballads in a low voice, melodies her grandmother had taught her that spoke of impossible loves and intertwined destinies. She didn't notice Gareth silently observing her from the threshold, captivated as much by the dexterity of her hands as by the melancholy in her voice. You sing as if each word were a secret between you and the universe, he commented one afternoon, startling her. Thea abruptly stopped singing, blushing. Her fingers, stained with pigments, tensed over the canvas. My grandmother used to say that songs are the soul converted into sound, she responded after a moment of silence. I suppose it's difficult to hide the soul. And what other secrets do those hands guard? Asked Gareth, approaching to examine her work. The question floated between them, laden with meanings neither dared to fully explore. Thea contemplated her own hands, surprised by the intimacy of the question. My hands know the language of earth and fire, she finally said. They know how pigments transform, how they respond to light. But they also know hunger, cold, and fear, she added, her voice adopting a harder tone. They're not a lady's hands, Mr. Montgomery. Interesting hands never are, he responded with an enigmatic smile. That same evening during dinner, Gareth surprised Thea by asking her opinion on an investment he was considering, the purchase of a small winery in the Finger Lakes region that was experiencing financial difficulties. Why are you asking me? She questioned, disconcerted. I know nothing about business. Sometimes fresh eyes see what experienced ones overlook, he responded, serving her more wine. I trust your intuition. Thea remained silent, considering the situation. Finally, she spoke cautiously. My grandfather always said that you should judge a winery by three things: the land where the vines grow, the hands that tend the barrels, and the secrets its cellars keep, she recalled. If the land is good and the hands honest, it's worth risking for the secrets. A week later, when Gareth returned from visiting the property, his face reflected a mixture of amazement and admiration. You were right, he declared, dropping into a courtyard armchair as the night breeze gently stirred the jasmine. The winery has one of the largest reserves of pre-prohibition bourbon in the region, stored in a subterranean cellar the current owner knew nothing about. How did you know? Thea shook her head, as surprised as he was. I didn't know, she confessed. "I just repeated my grandfather's words." "Your instincts are worth more than all my years of experience," affirmed Gareth, observing her in a new light. "I wonder what other talents you're hiding." That night, as the moon cast dancing shadows on the mansion walls, Thea understood that something was changing in her relationship with Gareth. What had begun as charity was transforming into respect, and this recognition of her worth, after years of feeling invisible, was more disturbing than any other emotion she had experienced. The mansion, which had initially seemed to Thea like a gilded cage, began to transform into a space where she could breathe. Her days acquired a rhythm. Mornings dedicated to the meticulous restoration of paintings, afternoons learning from Gareth about art, history and business, and evenings contemplating the stars from the Belvedere that offered panoramic views of Boston's illuminated skyline. However, as her confidence grew, so did her restlessness. Gareth continued to be an enigma to her. Occasionally, Thea caught him looking at a framed photograph he kept in his study, his face transformed by a sadness so profound that it was almost unbearable to witness. Silences, reflected Thea as she worked on a complex pattern in a painting, are sometimes more revealing than words. We build walls with what we keep silent, not with what we say. One May morning, as Thea was polishing a particularly valuable portrait, the mansion's tranquility was interrupted by the unexpected arrival of visitors. From her workshop, she heard raised voices arguing in the main courtyard. "It's absolutely inappropriate, Gareth," exclaimed a female voice with an aristocratic accent. "People talk. Do you have any idea of the rumors circulating around Boston?" Thea approached silently until she could see the scene without being seen. In the courtyard, Gareth remained impassive before an elegantly dressed woman and an older man who accompanied her. "What people say is of no interest to me, Victoria," Gareth responded coldly. "My house, my decisions." "But it's not normal," the woman insisted. "A man of your position, living under the same roof as a—" "Be careful what you're about to say," Gareth interrupted her, his voice becoming a threatening whisper. "Thea is my guest and deserves all my respect. And yours." "Your daughter wouldn't approve of this," the man intervened, pronouncing each word as if it were a sentence. "Imogen would be ashamed." Gareth's face transformed. For an instant, Thea saw something wild in his expression, a pain so raw that it made her step back. "Don't say her name," Gareth murmured. "You have no right." The couple left shortly after, leaving behind a silence as dense as bitter honey. Thea remained hidden, processing what she had just discovered. Gareth had a daughter named Imogen, from whom he was apparently estranged. Was she the person in the photograph? That night during dinner, Thea found the courage to ask, "Who is Imogen?" The question fell between them like a sharp knife. Gareth set down his wineglass with excessive care. "My daughter," he finally responded, his voice devoid of emotion. "She lives in New York. We haven't spoken in 5 years." "I'm sorry," Thea murmured. "I shouldn't have asked." "No," Gareth shook his head. "You have the right to know with whom you're living. Imogen and we had a disagreement about her marriage to a man I considered unsuitable. I said things—" His voice broke slightly. Things a father should never say. A silence laden with meaning settled between them. Thea understood then that Gareth had not only offered her refuge, he was also seeking his own redemption. "Sometimes," Thea said softly, "forgiving ourselves is harder than forgiving others." Gareth raised his gaze, surprised by the wisdom in such young words. "And you?" he asked. "What secrets do you keep, Thea? You've been here 3 months and I barely know anything about your past." The young woman contemplated the dancing shadows the candles cast on the table. Every word she would speak would be either a bridge or a wall between them. "My mother died when I was 16, she began, carefully choosing her words. "My father had abandoned us long before. I survived thanks to the restoration workshop where I worked, until it closed 6 months ago. After that," her eyes clouded, "I did what I could to survive. I'm not always proud of it." "I don't judge you," Gareth assured. "No one who hasn't known hunger has the right to judge the decisions of those who have suffered it." That night, as the mansion slept, both remained awake in their respective rooms, contemplating the New England stars through century-old windows, each wondering what new bridges could be built on the foundations of shared truths. June arrived with a stifling heat, that made Boston afternoons an exercise in patience. The mansion, with its thick stone walls, offered a cool refuge against the implacable New England summer. Thea had acquired the habit of exploring the less frequented corners of the enormous house during the hottest hours, discovering new architectural secrets with each excursion. It was during one of these explorations that she found the forgotten library in the East Wing, a circular room whose walls were completely lined with walnut bookshelves that rose to the vaulted ceiling. The accumulated dust indicated that no one had disturbed this sanctuary for years. Fascinated, Thea ran her fingers over the worn leather spines of century-old volumes, treatises on botany, medieval poetry manuscripts, travel diaries of 19th-century explorers. Each book was a door to vanished worlds. In a secluded corner, a cedar secretary desk with mother-of-pearl inlays caught her attention. Intrigued, she tried to open its small drawers, but they were locked. Curiosity, she told herself as she examined the piece of furniture, is both our greatest gift and our most persistent curse. It drives us to discover truths for which we may not be prepared. Something in the ornamentation of the secretary seemed strangely familiar to her. The geometric patterns carved into the wood reminded her of the designs her mother used to absent-mindedly draw while telling her bedtime stories. With trembling fingers, she pressed a small 8-pointed star at the center of the front panel. A soft click was heard, and a secret compartment opened, revealing a yellowed envelope. Thea's heart leaped when she recognized the handwriting of the sender, Winifred Harrington, her mother. With trembling hands, she extracted the never-sent letter and began to read. Dear Leonora, 10 years have passed since I worked on the restoration of the paintings at Montgomery Mansion, and I still clearly remember the kindness with which you treated me. My little Thea was playing then with your daughter Imogen in the gardens, while we shared secrets and hopes about our girls' futures. Thea dropped the letter, stunned. Images rushed to her mind like fragments of a forgotten dream. A brown-haired girl laughing as they ran among apple trees, the sound of a fountain, the scent of jasmine. These weren't imaginings, they were memories. She had been in this mansion before. Her mother had worked here. The sound of approaching footsteps startled her. Quickly, she tucked the letter into her dress pocket just as Gareth appeared in the library doorway. I see you've discovered my secret, he commented with a smile, apparently referring only to the library. This was my refuge when the outside world became too noisy. Thea struggled to maintain her composure, her mind frantically processing the implications of her discovery. It's wonderful, she managed to say. Why is it abandoned? Gareth's smile faded, replaced by a melancholic expression. Imogen and I used to spend hours here, he explained. After our separation, I didn't have the courage to return. That night, alone in her room, Thea reread the letter over and over by the trembling light of a candle. Her mother had known Gareth's family. She had worked in this very mansion, and Thea, as a child, had played with Imogen, Gareth's now estranged daughter. It wasn't coincidence that the storm had brought her precisely to these doors. It was as if destiny had drawn a perfect circle, returning her to the starting point. The discovery filled her with both wonder and disquiet. Should she tell Gareth? Would it change how he saw her? Or perhaps he already knew, and that's why he had taken her in. The next morning, with dark circles that evidenced a sleepless night, Thea made a decision. She wouldn't immediately reveal her discovery to Gareth. First, she needed to better understand what it all meant, what invisible connections had intertwined their lives long before that stormy night. With renewed determination, she headed to the workshop and resumed her restoration work. But now each painting she touched seemed to contain fragments of a larger story, a story that perhaps her own mother had helped preserve years ago. Meanwhile, in his study, Gareth held a freshly arrived telegram. His normally impassive face reflected a mixture of surprise and concern. The message was brief, but impactful. Returning to Boston next week. We need to talk. Imogen. The announcement of Imogen's imminent arrival altered the mansion's atmosphere like a sudden change in atmospheric pressure before a storm. Gareth, habitually serene, displayed an uneasiness that manifested in small gestures. He obsessively reorganized the books in his study, repeatedly checked the guest rooms, and spent long hours contemplating the horizon from the belvedere. Thea observed these changes with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Her mother's letter remained hidden in her nightstand drawer. a secret that weighed increasingly on her conscience. Half-truths, she reflected, while meticulously polishing a particularly intricate portrait, are like these geometric designs. They seem complete from certain angles, but a piece is always missing to see the pattern in its entirety. 3 days before Imogen's expected arrival, Thea found Gareth in the library, contemplating an old photo album. She paused at the threshold, unsure whether to interrupt such an intimate moment. "You can come in," he said without raising his gaze, as if he had sensed her presence. "I don't bite." Thea approached cautiously and sat beside him on the worn leather sofa. The photographs showed a girl growing page after page, first a smiling baby, then a girl with braids proudly holding a drawing. Later, a teenage girl with a defiant look. "Imogen," Thea murmured, recognizing in those youthful features the girl from her fragmented memories. "Yes," Gareth confirmed, turning the pages with reverence. "She was always too smart for her own good. Too much like me, I suppose." He turned another page, revealing a photograph that made Thea's heart stop. In it, 2 girls of about 8 years posed beside the courtyard fountain with intertwined arms and radiant smiles. One was undoubtedly Imogen. The other— "That's me," Thea whispered, unable to contain the surprise in her voice. Gareth abruptly raised his gaze, his eyes seeking hers with disconcerting intensity. "What did you say?" With trembling fingers, Thea pointed to the second girl in the photograph. "That girl is me," she repeated with more firmness. "And this woman," she indicated a figure partially visible at the edge of the image, "is my mother, Winifred Harrington." A dense, almost palpable silence settled between them. Gareth alternatively contemplated the photograph and Thea's face, as if seeking the connection that had been before his eyes the entire time. "Impossible," he finally murmured. "I would remember." Thea rose and quickly went to her room, returning with her mother's letter. Without a word, she handed it to Gareth, who read it with growing amazement. "Your mother," he said when he finished, his voice barely audible. "Winifred. The restorer that Leonora, my wife, hired for the paintings in the East Salon. Now I remember, she brought her little girl several times. You and Imogen became instant friends." "Why didn't you recognize me when you found me at your door?" Thea asked, with a mixture of confusion and reproach. Gareth shook his head, stunned. 15 years have passed, Thea. You were a child then. And I— He paused, searching for words. "After Leonora's death and my estrangement from Imogen, I blocked many memories from that period. Too painful." Thea felt the pieces fitting together like in a complex mosaic. Her mother had worked in this mansion. She had played with Gareth's daughter. And now, years later, destiny had returned her to the same place, as if the circle needed to be completed. "There's more," Gareth confessed, his voice taking on a grave tone. "Your mother didn't just restore paintings here. She was an exceptional artist. She created new works for the South Wing that are considered masterpieces by experts. I always wondered what became of her." Thea's eyes filled with tears. "She died when I was 16. A sudden illness. She never spoke to me of this place or of you." Gareth closed the album carefully, like someone closing one chapter to open another. "Perhaps because the memories were too precious," he suggested. "Or too painful." That night, as Boston was covered with a mantle of stars, Thea and Gareth remained in the library until dawn, reconstructing fragments of the past, trying to understand how their paths, separated for so long, had crossed again. "Will you tell Imogen?" Thea asked, when the first rays of sun began to filter through the stained glass. Gareth contemplated his cup of cold coffee before responding. "I believe destiny has already moved its pieces," he said finally. "Now it's up to us to decide how to continue the game." The day of Imogen's return dawned with an intensely blue sky, without a single cloud to presage the emotional storm that approached. Thea had dressed with particular care, choosing a simple blue dress that her mother had made for her years ago, as if she needed that talisman from her past to face what was coming. The entire mansion seemed to hold its breath. Mrs. Sullivan, the housekeeper who had served the family for decades, traversed the corridors adjusting flowers, straightening pictures, and murmuring prayers in a low voice. "Miss Imogen has always been demanding," she commented to Thea while arranging a vase of white roses. "From childhood she knew exactly what she wanted and how she wanted it. Just like her father, though neither will ever admit it." Thea nodded, feeling a strange familiarity with that description, as if recovering fragments of a hazy memory. Reunion, she thought, as she watched Gareth nervously pacing the courtyard, is always a mirror that shows us not only who returns, but who we've become during their absence. At noon exactly, the doorbell of the main entrance resonated throughout the mansion. Thea, who had strategically retreated to her workshop, held her breath. She heard voices in the foyer, footsteps, muffled exclamations. Then, a dense silence that seemed to absorb all other sounds. Focused on her work, or at least pretending to be, she didn't notice the presence at the threshold until a female voice spoke. "So you're the one who's been restoring the paintings." Thea raised her gaze to find herself before eyes identical to Gareth's, but in a younger and sharper face. Imogen Montgomery, at 30, emanated a natural elegance that contrasted with her cautious, almost defensive expression. "Yes," Thea responded, rising slowly. "I'm Thea Harrington." Something changed in Imogen's expression upon hearing the surname. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Harrington," she repeated, "like Winifred Harrington, the restorer." "My mother," Thea confirmed, surprised that Imogen remembered the name. A silence laden with meaning settled between them. Imogen surveyed the workshop with her gaze, lingering on the partially restored paintings, the precisely arranged tools, the preliminary sketches Thea had made. "I remember this place," she said finally, with a softer voice. "I used to hide here when my mother and yours worked together. I liked to watch you draw. You had a special gift for capturing patterns, even then." Thea felt something loosen in her chest, a tension she hadn't known she was holding. "I didn't remember any of this until a few days ago," she confessed. "I found a letter from my mother." Imogen nodded slowly, as if processing this information. "Life has strange ways of closing circles," she murmured, more to herself than to Thea. "May I?" she asked, indicating a nearby stool. During the following hour, as the afternoon sun projected geometric patterns through the shutters, the two women exchanged fragments of their lives like pieces of a puzzle that slowly began to take shape. Imogen spoke of her failed marriage to the man her father had disapproved of, her career as an art historian in New York, her recent decision to return to Boston after years of absence. "My father and I are too alike," she explained with an ironic smile, proud to the core. Neither wanted to take the first step toward reconciliation. "What changed?" Thea asked, genuinely intrigued. Imogen remained silent for a moment, as if considering how much to reveal. "I received an offer to direct the restoration department at the Museum of Fine Arts," she said finally. "It's my dream job, but accepting it would mean permanently establishing myself in Boston. I couldn't do that without first resolving things with my father." Dinner that night was a tense and strangely ceremonious event. Gareth presided over the table like a captain uncertain of his crew, alternating between moments of excessive formality and outbursts of barely contained emotion. Imogen maintained a studied composure, responding with measured phrases and calculated smiles. Thea observed this dance of appearances, feeling simultaneously an intruder and a necessary bridge between father and daughter. It was during dessert that Gareth finally addressed the topic that hovered like a ghost in the room. "Your room is exactly as you left it," he said, staring fixedly at his wineglass. "In case you decide to stay." Imogen set her spoon with millimetric precision beside her plate of crème brûlée. "I've accepted the position at the museum," she announced. "I start in 2 weeks." Gareth's eyes lit up with a hope so vulnerable that Thea had to look away, feeling she was witnessing something too intimate. "But," Imogen continued, her voice acquiring an edge, "I can't live here, Father. Not yet. I've rented an apartment near Beacon Hill." The hope on Gareth's face faltered, but didn't completely extinguish. "I understand," he said with dignity. "It's a start." Later that night, as Thea was retiring to her room, she found Imogen in the corridor contemplating the moon through an arched window. "My father cares for you," Imogen said without preamble. "He looks at you the way he used to look at me." Thea paused, unsure how to respond. "Your return has given him back his life," she finally offered. "These past days preparing for your arrival, I've seen him more animated than ever." Imogen turned toward her, her face partially illuminated by the silvery moonlight. "I didn't come just for him," she confessed. "I came because I needed to understand why, after so long, he decided to welcome someone into this house. that has been like a mausoleum for years. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Thea understood that Imogen's return marked the true turning point in their shared story. What had begun as shelter in the storm was evolving into something more complex and profound, the reconstruction not only of old paintings, but of fractured lives that, like in a mosaic, could create a new design from broken pieces. July brought with it an implacable heat that seemed to melt even the century-old stones of Boston. The streets emptied during the most intense hours of the day as Bostonians sought refuge in shaded courtyards and refreshing fountains. At Montgomery Mansion, however, a storm of a different nature was beginning to form. The news of Imogen's return and Thea's presence in Gareth Montgomery's house had spread through Boston's social circles like fire in a dry field. The rumors, fueled by imagination and the summer boredom of high society, grew and transformed with each new mouth that repeated them. Thea first noticed it in the furtive glances of vendors at the market, then in the whispers that were interrupted when she entered a shop. Boston, with its apparent sophistication, remained at heart a city where secrets had a short life. Whispers, Thea reflected as she returned to the mansion with a basket of aromatic herbs for the kitchen, are like the wind through leaves, impossible to catch, but capable of announcing the approaching storm. Confirmation came in the form of a rejected invitation. Gareth had submitted Thea's candidacy for an art restoration exhibition at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, trusting that her talent would speak for itself. The response was a diplomatically cold letter suggesting that, perhaps on another occasion, when Miss Harrington has a more established portfolio. "It's absurd," Gareth declared, throwing the letter onto his desk. "Your work surpasses that of restorers with decades of experience." Thea picked up the letter, reading it with an impassive expression. "It's because of the rumors, isn't it?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "About us?" Gareth looked away, uncomfortable. At 47, with his social and economic position consolidated, few things could disturb him. But the idea that his reputation might damage Thea's opportunities was unbearable to him. "Boston has always had too long a memory and an excessively fertile imagination," he finally responded. "But this will pass. Your talent is undeniable." That afternoon, while Thea was working on the restoration of a particularly complex painting, Imogen appeared at the workshop threshold. In the 2 weeks since her return, she had established a routine of regular visits to the mansion, slowly building bridges with her father while maintaining a prudent distance that both seemed to need. "I brought you something," she announced, placing a newspaper on the work table. "Page 7. Thea cleaned her hands and opened the newspaper. A small article in the cultural section bore the title, "Montgomery Heir Returns to Direct Prestigious Restoration Department." The photograph showed Imogen smiling formally alongside various local dignitaries. "Congratulations," Thea said sincerely. "You must be very proud." "Read the last paragraph," Imogen indicated, her expression unreadable. Thea continued reading until reaching the end of the article. "Miss Montgomery has announced that her first initiative will be an exhibition on traditional techniques of colonial portrait restoration, counting on the collaboration of emerging talents, among them the restorer Thea Harrington." Thea looked up, surprised. "Me? But you haven't even really seen me work." Imogen shrugged with a studied elegance. "I don't need to see you work. I've seen the results." "Besides," she added with a defiant gleam in her eyes, "nothing bothers certain circles in Boston more than seeing a Montgomery publicly supporting what they've tried to silence." That night during dinner, Gareth raised his glass in a toast. "To the stubborn women of this house," he declared with a smile. "May they never cease to surprise me." The atmosphere was almost festive, until the doorbell of the main entrance interrupted the celebration. Moments later, Mrs. Sullivan entered with a worried expression, holding an envelope. "Mr. Montgomery, they've left this for you," she said, extending the envelope with evident discomfort. The messenger insisted it was urgent. Gareth opened the envelope and extracted a single sheet of paper. His normally impassive face visibly paled as he read. "Father?" Imogen asked, alarmed. Without responding, Gareth passed the letter to his daughter. Thea observed how Imogen's expression changed from concern to indignation. "What does it say?" Thea finally asked, unable to contain her unease. Imogen handed her the letter with hands trembling with anger. It was a formal notification from the Boston Cultural Circle, informing Gareth Montgomery that his membership of more than 20 years was temporarily suspended due to behaviors that contravene the institution's moral standards. "It's ridiculous," Thea exclaimed, feeling a wave of guilt. "All this is because of my presence here." "No," Gareth interrupted her firmly. "It's because of the pettiness and hypocrisy of people who believe they have the right to judge what they don't understand." Imogen took the letter and methodically tore it into small pieces. "Tomorrow I'll submit my resignation to the museum," she declared. "I won't work with institutions that—" "You will do no such thing," Gareth interrupted her, with an authority that admitted no reply. "That position has been your dream since you were a girl. But father—" "Besides," Gareth continued, an enigmatic smile forming on his lips, "if you resign, how will you organize that exhibition that promises to be the cultural event of the year?" A reflective silence settled in the dining room. Thea looked alternatively at father and daughter, recognizing in their stubborn expressions the same determination she felt growing within herself. "There's another way," she said finally, an idea forming in her mind, "a way to confront these rumors head-on." And so, that July night, as cicadas sang their summer serenade in the mansion's gardens, the three began to plan what would be not just an exhibition, but a public declaration about family, art, and dignity that no one in Boston could ignore. August spread over Boston a blanket of suffocating heat that seemed to slow even time itself. At Montgomery Mansion, however, a feverish energy animated every corner. Preparation for the exhibition had transformed the place into a collective workshop where Thea, Imogen, and Gareth worked side by side, uniting their different talents in a common purpose. It was during this intense activity that Thea, searching for pigments in an old cabinet in the basement, discovered the box. A dark wood chest with silver and ivory inlays, protected by a rusted padlock that easily yielded to her insistence. Inside, wrapped in faded silk, she found dozens of letters, yellowed photographs, and a diary bound in red leather. Every old house, she thought as her fingers caressed the fragile pages of the diary, guards secrets that sleep like seeds in winter, waiting for the right moment to germinate. The diary belonged to Leonora Montgomery, Gareth's deceased wife and Imogen's mother. The first pages recounted the happiness of her marriage, the birth of her daughter, her dreams for the future. But as Thea advanced in her reading, the tone changed dramatically. Leonora described a progressive illness, confused diagnoses, painful treatments, and intertwined with her physical suffering, a growing concern for the future of her family when she would no longer be there. One paragraph in particular made Thea hold her breath. "I've hired Winifred Harrington to restore the paintings in the East Wing. Her work is exceptional, but it's her soul that has captivated me. She has a small daughter, Thea, who reminds me so much of Imogen at her age. I observe how they play together in the courtyard and think that perhaps when I'm gone, Winifred could be for Gareth what I will no longer be able to be. He will need someone who understands beauty as he does, someone who can love this mansion as I have loved it." Thea closed the diary, stunned. Leonora had imagined, had even desired, a union between her mother and Gareth, but something had prevented that desire from materializing. The letters perhaps contained answers, but Thea didn't feel entitled to continue exploring such intimate secrets without sharing her discovery. With the diary in trembling hands, she climbed the stairs to the study, where Gareth and Imogen were discussing the logistical details of the exhibition. "I found something," she announced from the threshold, her voice barely audible. "Something I think you should see." Gareth's face transformed as he recognized the diary. With an almost religious reverence, he took the book from Thea's hands. "Leonora's diary," he murmured. "I thought it was lost in the move after her death." Imogen approached, her eyes fixed on the object that contained the thoughts of the mother she barely remembered. "Have you read it?" she asked Thea, without accusation in her voice, only an intense curiosity. "Just a few pages," Thea confessed. "Enough to understand that there are connections between our families deeper than we imagined." The three moved to the courtyard, where the late afternoon light bathed the apple trees with a golden luminosity. Seated around the fountain, with the sound of water as the only witness, Gareth began to read aloud. His voice, normally firm, occasionally trembled as he pronounced the words his wife had written more than 20 years ago. The diary revealed a story of love, loss, and hope that none had fully known. Leonora, knowing her illness was terminal, had orchestrated a series of meetings between Winifred Harrington and her family, dreaming that this talented woman and her little daughter might fill the void she would leave. But destiny had traced another path. After Leonora's death, Winifred had stopped working at the mansion, abruptly cutting all communication with the Montgomerys. "I never understood why she disappeared," Gareth confessed, his gaze lost in memories. "One day she simply didn't come, and all my letters were returned unopened." Thea felt a piece of the puzzle fitting into place. "My mother never spoke to me of you," she said softly. "But among her belongings I found sketches of this mansion, drawings that seemed made from memory. I believe she never forgot this place." Imogen, who had remained unusually silent, took the diary from her father's hands and turned the pages until finding a specific entry. "Listen to this," she said, and began to read. "Winifred confessed to me today that she is in love with Gareth. She feels guilty, as if she were betraying my friendship. I told her that love is never betrayal, that my greatest desire is for them to find comfort in each other when I'm no longer here. But I see in her eyes a conflict that goes beyond guilt. There's something she doesn't tell me, a secret she carries like a stone on her heart." The silence that followed was so dense it seemed to have its own weight. Thea felt the world stop as she processed this revelation. Her mother had loved Gareth, but something had prevented her from accepting that love. "There's more," she said, suddenly remembering. "The letter I found. My mother mentioned a family art collection, pieces that had been hidden during the Civil War." Gareth's eyes lit up with sudden understanding. "The Harrington treasure," he murmured. "It was a legend in artistic circles, a collection of colonial portraits and historical paintings unique in the world, disappeared during the battles of 1863. "If that collection exists," Imogen intervened, her analytical mind immediately grasping the implications, "and if it could be found and authenticated, it would change everything," Gareth completed. "Not just for our exhibition, but for American art history." That night, as Boston slept under a star-studded sky, the three remained awake in the courtyard, surrounded by letters, photographs, and unearthed memories. The chest Thea had discovered had opened much more than family secrets. It had revealed possibilities that none had dared to imagine. When the first ray of sun appeared on the horizon, illuminating the skyline in the distance, Thea made a decision. "I need to go to Charleston," she announced. "My mother's letter mentions that the paintings were hidden in my grandfather's old workshop near the historic district." Gareth and Imogen exchanged a look of understanding. "We'll go with you," Gareth declared, with a determination that admitted no discussion. "This story belongs to all of us." The journey to Charleston was organized with the speed and efficiency characteristic of the Montgomerys. 3 days after the discovery of the diary, a car was taking them along the sinuous coastal highways, between century-old plantations and fields of wildflowers that inclined toward the sun like devotees in prayer. Thea observed the landscape with new eyes. Each curve of the road, each whitewashed town they left behind, seemed to lead her not only to a geographical destination, but to an encounter with her own past. "The roads we take," she reflected as the shadows of clouds drew changing patterns on the hills, "always lead us to crossroads where we must choose not only a direction, but who we want to be at the end of the journey." Gareth drove in silence. His profile, outlined against the landscape, showed a contained tension that Thea had learned to recognize. At his side, Imogen meticulously reviewed the notes they had compiled: Winifred's letter, extracts from Leonora's diary, historical records about the Harrington collection that she had managed to obtain from the museum archives. "According to these documents," Imogen commented, breaking the silence, "the collection included pieces from the late 1700s to the mid-1800s, some from the first colonial churches built in the South. If it really exists—" "It exists," Thea affirmed with a certainty that surprised even herself. "My mother never spoke of it, but she kept a box with old photographs. In some, you could see fragments of extraordinary paintings. I always thought they were from works she had restored, but now Charleston welcomed them with its golden light and steep streets that seemed to whisper stories of past civilizations." The old workshop of Thea's grandfather was located in the historic district, a few meters from the imposing St. Michael's Church, whose silhouette dominated the city's horizon. The building, a modest 18th-century construction, had been converted into a souvenir shop for tourists. Thea felt a pang of sadness, seeing how the place where her grandfather had created masterpieces now sold cheap reproductions of Charleston landmarks and Civil War memorabilia. "I don't know where to begin," she confessed, feeling that the magnitude of the task surpassed them. Decades have passed. The place has completely changed. Gareth placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "We'll start at the beginning," he said simply, "by talking to those who might remember." The investigation led them through a labyrinth of fragmented memories and contradictory clues. They spoke with old neighbors, consulted municipal archives, visited antiquarians who might have purchased pieces without knowing their true origin. Each day ended with more questions than answers, and frustration began to eat away at their determination. It was on the fourth day, when Thea was about to admit defeat, that they met Ambrose Jenkins, a 90-year-old man who had been an apprentice in the workshop next to her grandfather's. "Of course I remember Ambrose Harrington," the old man affirmed, his eyes clouded by cataracts yet gleaming with the fire of memories. "A master like few others. And yes, there were rumors about his collection. They said he had pieces that not even museums possessed. Do you know what became of them?" Thea asked, holding her breath. The old man remained silent a moment, as if evaluating whether he could trust them. "The night before the Union soldiers entered the city," he said finally, "I saw Ambrose and two other men loading crates. They took them to the basement of the old Huguenot church. There was a passage that connected with the colonial cellars under the city. No one has entered there in decades." That evening, in the hotel room where they were staying, Thea, Gareth, and Imogen studied old maps of the city they had obtained from the municipal archive. Indeed, there existed a network of colonial tunnels under the historic center, many of them sealed or collapsed with the passing of time. "We need permits to excavate," Imogen pointed out, always practical. "Without proper authorization, any attempt would be illegal." "That would take months," Gareth replied, frustrated, "and it would attract the attention of too many people. If the collection is really there, it could disappear before we set foot in the tunnels." Thea observed the exchange in silence, an internal struggle developing within her. On one hand, the possibility of recovering the family legacy filled her with determination. On the other, the consequences of acting precipitously could be disastrous. "There's another way," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "My mother gave me something before she died. I never understood its meaning until now." From her purse she extracted a small silver medallion with intricate geometric designs engraved upon it. "It's a key," she explained, "not a conventional key, but a seal. My mother said it opened doors that others couldn't see." Gareth examined the medallion with amazement. "It's colonial, probably from the late 1700s. These patterns—" His fingers traced the designs with reverence. "They're not just decorative. They're a map." They worked all night, comparing the medallion's patterns with the old maps of the city. At dawn, they had identified a specific point where the colonial tunnels, the old water canals, and the foundations of the Huguenot church converged. "It will be sealed," Imogen warned, "and probably guarded." "Or completely forgotten," Thea countered. "The best-kept secrets are those hidden in plain sight." The decision they faced was clear and terrifying. They could follow the legal path, request permits that might be denied, or attract unwanted attention, or they could risk everything in a clandestine exploration, trusting an ancient medallion and the word of an old man whose memory might be distorted by time. "What do we do?" Thea asked, feeling the weight of responsibility. Gareth looked at his daughter and then at Thea, an iron determination illuminating his face. "We'll recover what is rightfully yours," he declared. "Tonight." As the sun set over Charleston, bathing the city in copper tones, the three prepared for an adventure that would change their lives forever. What none could foresee was that the true test would not be finding the lost collection, but facing the truths they would discover along with it. Night enveloped Charleston in a mantle of black velvet sprinkled with stars. The streets of the historic district, usually bustling with tourists, had remained deserted except for the occasional stray cat that slipped like a shadow between planters of geraniums. The silence was so profound that Thea could hear her own heartbeat as she followed Gareth and Imogen through alleys that seemed lifted from a medieval tale. The most valuable treasures, she thought, as her fingers nervously caressed the medallion in her pocket, "are not those that shine in the light, but those that remain hidden in darkness, waiting to be rediscovered by those with eyes to see." The entrance to the passage was exactly where they had predicted, a small courtyard behind an abandoned house covered with weeds and debris. A stone slab, almost invisible under years of neglect, showed a worn pattern that perfectly matched the design of the medallion. "It's here," Gareth whispered, kneeling to clean the surface with careful hands. Imogen, always prepared, extracted from her backpack flashlights, gloves, and tools she had discreetly acquired that afternoon. The young art historian, who normally scrupulously respected archaeological regulations, had decided that some rules could be broken when family history was at stake. With coordinated effort, they managed to move the heavy slab, revealing a narrow passage that descended into darkness. The air that emerged was cold and ancient, charged with the aroma of centuries of silence. "I'll go first," Thea decided, surprising the other two. "It's my heritage. My responsibility." The descent was arduous. Worn and slippery steps led ever deeper beneath the modern city, crossing layers of history like an archaeologist crosses geological strata. They passed beside Roman remains, colonial arches, and, finally, reached a small chamber with whitewashed walls that showed clear signs of having been adapted in more recent times. In the center of the chamber, protected by a thick layer of dust, were 7 wooden crates, carefully sealed with wax. "My God," Imogen murmured, her voice reverberating in the confined space. "They're really here." With trembling hands, Thea opened the first crate. The glow of her flashlight revealed, perfectly preserved in dry straw, dozens of paintings of incomparable beauty. Geometric designs of hypnotic complexity, sacred figures that danced like visual music, colors that had resisted the passage of centuries maintaining their original vividness. "They're authentic," Gareth confirmed, examining a piece with an expert eye. "Colonial era, early 1800s, probably from the first church in Charleston before the British occupation. These pieces are—" His voice broke with emotion. "They're absolutely unique. Each crate contained different treasures, Georgian portraits, Revolutionary War scenes, works that showed the fusion of styles that characterized American art during its golden period. But it was the last crate that contained the greatest surprise. Besides several exceptional pieces, it contained a leather-bound book and a yellowed envelope addressed to 'My daughter Thea, when she is ready to understand.' With trembling fingers, Thea opened the envelope and began to read her mother's letter. "Dear Thea, if you are reading this, you have found our family's treasure and are ready to know the truth that I didn't have the courage to tell you in life. Our story is intertwined with that of the Montgomerys more deeply than you could imagine. Gareth and I loved each other briefly during the months I worked in his mansion. It was an impossible love, born of shared pain and mutual admiration. Leonora, his wife, in her infinite generosity, gave us her blessing before she died. But I couldn't accept that happiness, not when I kept a secret that could destroy everything. The grandfather who taught you the art of restoration, Ambrose Harrington, wasn't really your grandfather. He was your great-uncle. Your real grandfather was William Montgomery, Gareth's father, who had a secret relationship with my mother for years, which means, my dear daughter, that you and Gareth share the same blood. He is your second uncle. I couldn't tell this to Gareth, not after Leonora's death when he was so vulnerable, and I feared that Imogen, then just a child, would suffer unnecessary confusion and pain, so I disappeared from their lives, taking with me this secret and my unrequited love. This collection is not just our family heritage, it's the proof of our shared origins. The book contains the complete genealogy and documents that prove everything. Forgive me for not having the courage to tell you this in life. I hope this revelation doesn't cause you pain, but helps you understand who you truly are and the extraordinary artistic lineage from which you come. With all my love, Mom." Thea raised her gaze from the letter, her world irrevocably transformed. Gareth and Imogen observed her with worried expressions, intuiting from her face that the letter's content was deeply disturbing. "What's wrong?" Gareth asked, his voice gentle but urgent. "What does the letter say?" With trembling hands, Thea handed him the letter. As Gareth read, his face passed from confusion to amazement, and finally to a complex emotion that combined pain and something akin to relief. "We were family all along," he murmured, looking at Thea with new eyes. "That's why I felt that immediate connection when I found you at my door. It wasn't coincidence. It was blood recognizing blood." Imogen, who had read the letter over her father's shoulder, approached Thea and, in an unexpected gesture, embraced her. "I always wanted a sister," she said simply. That night, as they carefully transported the crates to a safe place, the three understood they had found much more than an art collection. They had discovered a truth that, although painful, completed a circle that destiny had traced decades ago. The medallion that had served as the key to open the secret chamber now hung from Thea's neck, a tangible symbol that some treasures are not made of canvas and pigments, but of truths that, once revealed, can heal wounds we didn't even know we had. September arrived in Boston with fresh winds that swept the cobblestone streets, carrying away the suffocating heat of summer and bringing with it an air of renewal. At Montgomery Mansion, this spirit of rebirth was not merely metaphorical. Rooms that for years had remained closed now opened wide. The sheets that covered antique furniture were removed, and the sound of animated conversations and laughter replaced the solemn silence that had reigned for so long. The Harrington Montgomery collection, as they now called it, had been carefully catalogued and prepared for exhibition. Each piece told a story not only of American colonial art, but also of the two families whose lives had intertwined across generations. True rebirth, Thea reflected as she applied delicate finishing touches to a portrait from the early 1800s, doesn't consist of returning to what we were, but in integrating our past into what we are destined to become. The revelation of her kinship with the Montgomerys had profoundly transformed her relationship with Gareth and Imogen. What had begun as charity, evolved into mutual respect and friendship, had now become a family bond that none of them had anticipated. Gareth, who initially had seen her as a reminder of his estranged daughter, now saw her as an unexpected link to his own father, a man he had never fully understood. "My father was always an enigma to me," he confessed to her one afternoon as they reviewed the exhibition catalogue together. "Severe in public, but capable of surprising sensitivity when we were alone. Now I understand where that duality came from. He had a secret life, a love he had to hide due to the social conventions of the time." Imogen, for her part, had embraced Thea as the sister she never had. Their relationship, initially marked by caution, had blossomed into a complicity that surprised them both. "I always knew we resembled each other in some way," Imogen commented one evening, as they shared a bottle of wine on the terrace. "There's something in your way of looking at the world, in how you defend what you believe is right. It's the same fire my grandfather had, they say." News of the exhibition had generated considerable excitement in Boston's cultural circles. The promise of seeing unseen pieces of American colonial art attracted attention not only from local media, but also from international specialized publications. However, rumors about the relationship between Thea and the Montgomerys persisted, now with a new twist. It was said that the young restorer had manipulated the family to appropriate their heritage. These rumors reached their critical point when Victoria Blackwell, the same woman who had confronted Gareth months earlier, presented a formal complaint to the museum's board of trustees, questioning the collection's authenticity and Thea's legitimacy as a Harrington descendant. "They want a DNA test," Imogen announced during breakfast, throwing the newspaper onto the table with indignation. "They insinuate that we've fabricated the entire kinship story to justify the exhibition." Gareth, who in other times would have reacted with fury to such an affront, surprised both women with his serenity. "Then we'll give them exactly what they ask for," he declared. "A DNA test that confirms our relationship, and when the results prove we're telling the truth, I'll demand a public apology." Preparation for the exhibition continued despite the controversy. Thea, determined to let her work speak for itself, dedicated up to 16 hours a day to the restoration and mounting of the pieces. Her technique, which combined traditional methods with subtle innovations, transformed each painting into a window to the past that simultaneously dialogued with the present. It was during these weeks of intense work that she received an unexpected offer. The restoration director of the Charleston Museum proposed that she direct an ambitious project to recover the original paintings of the historic building. "It's a unique opportunity," Imogen told her when Thea showed her the letter, "the kind of project that defines a career." Thea contemplated the offer with mixed feelings. On one hand, it represented the professional recognition she had always dreamed of. On the other, it meant leaving Boston and the mansion she now considered her home. "You don't have to decide right away," Gareth reassured her, noticing her conflict. "The exhibition comes first. After, you'll have time to consider your future." A week before the inauguration, the DNA results arrived in a certified envelope. The three gathered in Gareth's study, aware that the contents of that envelope, although they already intuited the result, would officially formalize their family connection. Gareth opened the envelope with slightly trembling hands and read the report in silence. Then, with a smile that illuminated his normally austere face, he simply nodded. "It's official," he said. "We're family." That night, as the three dined in the courtyard under stars that seemed to shine with particular intensity, Thea made a decision that had been forming within her for weeks. "I'll accept the job in Charleston," she announced, surprising both Gareth and Imogen. "But on one condition." "Which?" Gareth asked, trying to hide his disappointment. "That it not be a goodbye, but a see you soon," Thea responded, her eyes bright with emotion. "This mansion will always be my home and you my family. But I need to build something of my own, prove that I can fly with my own wings." Gareth remained silent a moment, processing her words. Finally, with a smile of paternal pride, he raised his glass. "To Thea Harrington Montgomery," he toasted. Artist, restorer, and above all, brave woman who knows that the strongest roots are those that allow you to grow toward the sky without fear of losing your essence." The toast resonated in the courtyard like a promise, a pact between three people whom destiny had reunited in the most unexpected ways. And as the moon rose over Boston, illuminating the skyline in the distance, Thea knew she had found not only her past, but also the path to her future. The day of the inauguration of the exhibition, Interwoven Legacies, the Harrington Montgomery Collection, dawned with a perfectly blue sky, as if the universe itself wanted to create the ideal scenario for the event. The Museum of Fine Arts, with its neoclassical architecture and luminous spaces, had been transformed to house an exhibition that promised to rewrite part of American art history. From early morning, an army of professionals finalized the details, lighting technicians adjusting spotlights to highlight the vibrant colors of the paintings, conservators checking humidity and temperature conditions, journalists conducting preliminary interviews with Imogen, who, as director of the museum's restoration department, acted as the official spokesperson. Thea observed everything from a discreet second plane, still not accustomed to the attention that her work and her recently discovered family connection had generated. Dressed in an elegant navy blue suit, a gift from Gareth for the occasion, she tried to calm her nerves by mentally reviewing the technical details of each exhibited piece. "Public recognition," she thought as she watched photographers preparing their equipment, "is like a double-edged mirror. It shows us both our achievements and our deepest fears of being judged and found insufficient." Gareth approached her, impeccable in his dark grey suit, a figure that radiated authority and, for those who knew how to observe, a barely contained paternal pride. "You're pale," he commented, offering her a cup of coffee. "Breathe. Everything will be fine." "What if they don't like it?" Thea murmured, verbalizing for the first time the fear that had accompanied her for weeks. "What if they think we've exaggerated the importance of the collection?" "Impossible," Gareth responded firmly. "Every expert who has seen the pieces has confirmed their extraordinary value. Besides," he added with a smile, "they're not here to judge you, but to marvel at an artistic heritage you've helped preserve." At 7 o'clock sharp, the doors opened for the VIP guests, local authorities, academics, art critics, and representatives of international museums. Imogen, in her role as hostess, welcomed them with a natural elegance, while Gareth moved among the groups with the ease of someone who has navigated social waters all his life. Victoria Blackwell, Thea's main detractor, arrived accompanied by her husband, her lips pursed in an expression of skepticism that began to fade as she toured the exhibition. The magnificence of the pieces, the meticulous restoration, and the historical narrative that accompanied them were incontestable even for the most severe critic. The culminating moment of the evening arrived when Boston's mayor asked Gareth to offer some words. With Thea and Imogen flanking him, Gareth addressed the audience with an emotion he rarely allowed himself to show in public. "This collection," he began, his voice resonating in the suddenly silent hall, represents much more than old paintings. It is the testimony of how art transcends time, wars, and family secrets. For generations, these pieces remained hidden, protected by hands that understood their value, not only artistic, but also human. Today, thanks to the talent and determination of two extraordinary women, he gestured toward Imogen and Thea, this legacy finally sees the light. He paused, allowing his words to settle in the audience before continuing. But there's another story these pieces tell us, that of two families, the Harringtons and the Montgomerys, whose destinies intertwined across generations. A story of love, loss, and finally, reunion. Because art, like blood, always finds its way home. A spontaneous applause interrupted his words. When silence was restored, Gareth extended his hand toward Thea, inviting her to speak. It was an unexpected gesture that took her by surprise. They had never planned for her to address the public. With her heart beating rapidly, Thea stepped forward. For an instant, fear threatened to paralyze her, but then her gaze crossed with Imogen's, who offered her an encouraging smile, and she found the strength to speak. My mother used to say that paintings are like pages of a book that everyone can read, even those who don't know the letters, she began, her voice soft but clear. In them is written the history of colonial America, that extraordinary moment when cultures, religions, and artistic traditions fused to create something unique. Something that, like my own family history, demonstrates that the most enduring beauty arises precisely from those unexpected encounters between seemingly separate worlds. Concluding her brief speech, Thea felt a wave of relief and satisfaction. The applause that followed was warm and genuine, but more significant were the looks of respect she perceived on faces that before had observed her with skepticism. The evening continued with the fluidity of a river that finally finds its natural course. Critics who days before had questioned the legitimacy of the collection now approached Thea to congratulate her on her restoration work. Representatives of international museums conversed animatedly with Imogen about possible future collaborations. Even Victoria Blackwell, conquered by the evidence of talent and authenticity before her eyes, briefly approached Gareth to murmur what seemed to be an apology. Near midnight, when most of the guests had departed, Thea found herself alone before a display case that contained the oldest piece in the collection, a colonial portrait from the late 1700s of a cobalt blue so intense it seemed to contain the night sky in its surface. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" said a voice behind her. Thea turned to find herself face to face with Edmund Chandler, the restoration director of the Charleston Museum, who had offered her the position weeks earlier. "Like a window to the past," she responded, returning her gaze to the painting. "I wonder who created it. What hands gave form to this beauty that has survived so many centuries?" "Hands like yours," observed Edmund. "Artists who understood they were creating something destined to transcend them." They conversed for a while about restoration techniques and the specific challenges presented by the paintings at the Charleston Museum. Finally, Edmund addressed the topic that truly interested him. "Have you considered my offer?" he asked directly. "After seeing your work tonight, I'm even more convinced that you're the ideal person to direct our project." Thea nodded, feeling that the moment for definitive decisions had arrived. "I've considered it and I accept," she responded firmly. "But I'll need a few weeks to finalize some projects here and organize my move." Edmund's smile confirmed that the wait would not be a problem. They said goodbye with a handshake that sealed not only a professional agreement, but also the beginning of a new stage in Thea's life. Later, when the museum had fallen silent and only the three remained, Gareth, Imogen, and Thea toured the exhibition together one last time, like a family contemplating a shared photo album. "So Charleston," Gareth said finally, his voice mixing pride and a barely perceptible sadness. "A new chapter begins. Not an end, but a continuation," Thea corrected, linking her arm with his. "Boston will always be my home, and you my family. That will never change." Imogen, observing the scene, smiled with a mixture of tenderness and understanding. "Good artists know when a work is complete," she said, making a gesture that encompassed the exhibition. "And I believe our little family masterpiece has just reached its perfection." They left the museum together, three silhouettes outlined against Boston's starry sky, united by bonds that transcended blood and time, while the city's skyline shone in the distance, like a beacon that had guided their destinies toward this moment of culmination and new beginning. 18 months after that stormy night when Thea had collapsed on the steps of Montgomery Mansion, spring displayed its splendor over Charleston. The courtyards of the historic southern city adorned themselves with multicolored flowers that competed in fragrance and beauty, preparing for the annual festival that transformed every corner into a secret garden. Thea contemplated this explosion of life from the belvedere of her new home, a small but charming apartment in the historic district, a few steps from the Charleston Museum, where she directed the ambitious restoration project that had consolidated her reputation in the world of artistic conservation. Life, she reflected as she watched tourists photographing a particularly spectacular courtyard, traces circles that we can only understand when we stop and look back, recognizing each step as a necessary part of the path. Her work at the museum was progressing at a good pace. Under her direction, a team of restorers had already recovered hundreds of original paintings that decades of humidity and pollution had obscured. Each piece revealed was like recovering a fragment of history, a tangible connection with anonymous artists whose legacy she now protected. The sound of the main door opening interrupted her thoughts. She smiled, hearing familiar voices filling the apartment with their warmth. "Thea," Imogen called, leaving a bouquet of flowers on the hall table. "Where are you?" "On the belvedere," she responded, turning to welcome her visitors. Gareth and Imogen entered the small terrace, their faces illuminated by smiles that spoke of good news. They visited her regularly since her move to Charleston, but there was something special in their expression this day. "We bring news," Gareth announced, kissing Thea on both cheeks. "And celebration." While she prepared mint tea in the kitchen, she listened to their news. The Montgomery Foundation for Traditional Arts, which Gareth had established using part of his personal fortune, had just received official approval. Its main headquarters would be in Boston, in the family mansion, but it would establish an extension in Charleston, specifically dedicated to training young restorers. "The idea," Imogen explained, gratefully accepting the cup of tea, "is to create a scholarship program for kids from disadvantaged backgrounds with artistic talent. Like you before we met you." "The circle completes itself," Thea murmured, moved by the way her own story had inspired this project. "There's more," Gareth added, exchanging a complicit look with his daughter. "We want you to direct the Charleston headquarters. Compatible with your work at the museum, of course." The proposal took Thea by surprise. Directing a training center meant transmitting not only techniques, but also the passion and respect for a millennial art that had marked her own life in unimaginable ways. "It would be an honor," she finally responded, feeling that all the pieces fit into a perfect design. "But on one condition." "Which?" father and daughter asked in unison. "That it bear my mother's name," Thea responded. "The Winifred Harrington Center for Artistic Restoration. She deserves that recognition." Gareth nodded, visibly moved. "It's perfect," he said simply. That afternoon the three walked together through Charleston's cobblestone streets, occasionally stopping to admire particular courtyards that competed in the festival. The entire city seemed to celebrate with them, offering its beauty as a backdrop for this new chapter in their intertwined lives. They finally arrived at the Charleston Museum as the sun began its descent, bathing the ancient columns in a golden light that enhanced the red brick and the colonial arches. Thea guided them to the area where her team worked, a space normally closed to the public. "I want to show you something," she said, leading them to the main hall, the ancient prayer space oriented eastward that represented the spiritual heart of the building. There, partially restored, a section of paintings showed a geometric pattern of hypnotic complexity. Blues, greens, and golds intertwined in a mathematically perfect dance that nevertheless conveyed a sensation of organic, almost living movement. "It's extraordinary," Imogen murmured, approaching to better appreciate the details. "When did you discover it?" "Just 2 weeks ago," Thea explained. "It was hidden under layers of whitewash and dirt. But the most amazing thing is this." She pointed to a small detail on the lower edge of the panel, a discrete signature integrated into the design, 3 letters barely perceptible to someone who didn't know where to look. "WMM. William Montgomery Marsh," Gareth whispered, recognizing his father's initials. "How is this possible?" "According to the records I found, there was a partial restoration in 1925, Thea explained. Your father participated in it as an apprentice. This panel was his work, although officially it was attributed to his master. It's the missing link that confirms our family connection. The complete circle. The silence that followed was charged with emotion. The three contemplated the panel, each absorbing in their own way the significance of this discovery that connected past and present, art and blood, loss and redemption. As they left the museum, Charleston's sky transformed into a canvas where the sunset painted stripes of purple, orange and gold. They paused beside the Cooper River, observing how the water, silent witness to centuries of history, reflected the last rays of the sun. "You know," Gareth said, breaking the contemplative silence, "that night, when I found you at my door, I said you were mine, my responsibility, my ward." I had no idea how true those words were, though for completely different reasons than I imagined. "Destiny has a sense of humor," Thea responded with a smile. "It reunited us in the most improbable way to complete a story that began long before I was born." "And now what follows?" Imogen asked, always pragmatic even in the most emotional moments. Thea contemplated the horizon, where the silhouettes of palm trees and steeples were outlined against the increasingly dark sky. Her life had come full circle, transforming in ways she could never have imagined that stormy night in Boston. "Now," she responded with serene conviction, "we continue writing our story, together." Back at the apartment, as night unfolded its starry mantle over Charleston, the three shared a simple dinner on the terrace. The local wine gleamed like liquid rubies in their glasses as they toasted to the past they had discovered and the future they would build. In that moment of perfect harmony, Thea understood that her true treasure wasn't the century-old paintings or the professional recognition, but these human bonds that had resisted secrets, separations, and the relentless passage of time. Bonds that, like the geometric patterns of the paintings she restored, created a larger design whose beauty could only be appreciated when all the pieces finally found their place. The storm that had once brought her, soaked and desperate to the steps of Montgomery Mansion, had actually been the first step of a journey back to herself, to her roots, and to a family that had always been hers, though none had known it. And as the moon rose over Charleston's ancient rooftops, illuminating a world that seemed both new and ancestral at the same time, Thea knew with absolute certainty that she had found her place in the intricate mosaic of life.